So first I'm going to do just a quick refresher about magic loop in case you've done it before but you've forgotten. So I'll just go over that quickly and then we'll go into a more in-depth tutorial about how to actually get started. So stay for that one or skip forward to it if you need more instruction. Okay, so basically magic loop, we are knitting across one side of the sock and then we're flipping the needles around or pulling the cord through so that we can then knit back across the other side of the sock. So I'll show you how we do that. So the needle should always be on the stitches that doesn't have the working yarn on it. So you can see on this side, this is where the working yarn's coming from. This is the cord that we want to pull out long. And this is the needle that we're going to be knitting on because we're always closing that gap. So we're bridging that gap from this side to this side by working this working yarn into this side. So I'll just go ahead and knit across the row and just knit into the first stitch like normal. Usually do the first stitch a bit tight. Okay, so now that I've knit across the row, what I do is I flip it over, flip, so that the needles are coming from the right hand side. And then the same thing as before, we pull the needle out on the side that has the working yarn so that we can use this needle and these stitches will be on the cord. And then we pull this needle onto the stitches so that we can work into them. And then we go across again and we just keep doing that, repeat around and around and around. Okay, so now I'm going to do a tutorial on how to start and I'm going to use some different yarn and needles just because I think it'll be easier to see what's going on with this bigger yarn and needles. For this tutorial, I'm just going to cast on 20 stitches and make a tiny sock so that I can get through it quickly. Okay, so when you've cast on all the stitches for your sock, what you're going to do is pull them down onto the cord and then count to the halfway point. So for me, that's 10 stitches. And when you get to the halfway point, fold the cord in half and pull it through the gap. Like this. So what you'll have is half of your stitches on one side of the cord and the other half on the other side. Okay, so we always work with our needles on the right hand side, so I'm just going to flip it over. You'll always be working this yarn into the stitch on the other side so that it will close the gap, and that's how we get a loop or a tube for the sock. So this yarn will be bridging the gap between the two needles and we will then be knitting across here and then we'll pull the cord back out and we'll be knitting across this way again. So I'll show you how to do that. So we put the stitches onto that needle. We pull this one out long so that we can work with it easily. These stitches are just sitting on the cord. Then we get our working yarn, and however you hold your yarn, you'll just knit like normal. So I knit continental. Don't let it worry you when you see me pick up this yarn. If you're an English knitter and you're a bit confused about what's happening, all I'm doing is that I'm just setting up to knit the next stitch. So if you're an English knitter, you would just be holding your yarn in this hand and you would be getting ready to knit the next stitch. So we set up to knit like normal and we have our two needles as if we're just knitting normally with 2 needles. The difference is that we're knitting these stitches from the cord onto this needle, using this needle here independently from the cord here. Okay, so I'm going to go and do the first stitch just like a normal knit stitch, and I knit that, and I want to pull it nice and tight so that they join up, so that you don't have a big gap. So if you do it and you've got so if you do your stitch and you've got a bit of a gap here, don't worry, you'll be able to tighten that on the next round, but do try and tug it tight. Okay, so if we're working in pattern, the next stitch will be a knit as well. And then because I'm doing a 2 by 2 rib, the next 2 stitches are purl stitches. And then you just knit to the end in the pattern as normal. So this is actually not the end of a row, it's halfway through the round. So when we get to the end of the stitches on this needle, that's the halfway point of the round. Okay, so now I've knit the stitches to the end of that needle. What we're going to do now is we're going to flip the knitting over like this, so that our needles are coming from the right hand side again, because that's always the position that will work with them. And now what we need to do is adjust the needles again so that we can work this yarn across onto these stitches. So we pull the needle out of these stitches and we put them onto the cord, and we put the needle onto these stitches. They can be a bit fiddly for the first row. Don't worry, this definitely gets easier as you've knit a few rows. It's because I did that first stitch really tight there. So we've pushed these stitches onto the needle. I'll pull this cord out nice and long. Let me just get my yarn on the right side. So yeah, that's actually a good thing to remember. Make sure that your yarn isn't coming from underneath the cord, otherwise you'll put an accidental yarn over into your work. So you want the yarn to just be coming from this side of the cord, not looped under like this. Okay, so we just go ahead now and knit the next stitch, and you'll probably have a gap. Yours might even be bigger than mine if this is your first time doing it. Don't worry about that. Just try and do this next stitch nice and tight, and you'll also be able to tighten it up more in the next round. Nice and tight. You can tug it really nice and tight like that. And then also do the next stitch tight as well, so that will keep it secure. And then we just knit in the pattern to the end of the round. Okay, so I've knit across the first side and back across the second side, and that's one round complete. Now I've got a little bit of a gap here. We're going to close that up now on round 2. So again, we flip the work over, flip, and we do the same thing again. So you push the needle into the stitches on the side closest towards you, or the side that doesn't have the working yarn coming from it, and you pull the needle out from the side furthest away from you, or the side that does have the working yarn. So we're now up to round 2, and we're just going to do the process again. And this first stitch I'm going to do really nice and tight. Tug it, and also I'll pull the tail a little bit, and there we go. That gap is closed, especially when we do the next stitch. Nice and tight too. There's no gap anymore. Okay, so now just remember that even though you've been focusing on doing those first stitches tight, remember not to do the rest of your stitches too tight, because a lot of beginners at Magic Loop will be really tense and doing their stitches so super tight, and then your gauge will be completely different to what it normally is, and your knitting will be really stiff and rigid. So I know that it's tricky to start with, but just try to relax and knit like normal, because it really is just knitting like normal when you're in the row. You're just knitting with 2 needles. Even though there's all of this happening, it's really just normal knitting, so just remember that. And good luck. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, put a comment below, or send me an email. Okay, I'll see you in the next video.